he said something very interesting. He said, if you set up a utopia so that all people had to do was eat cakes and busy themselves with the continuation of the species, that, yeah, right, Russian humor, that after a surfeit of that, after enough of that, which would happen quite quickly, people would just go mad just to break things, just so something unexpected could happen, and that we're not built security and safety for something, well, let's call it adventure, like adventure. That's a good thing to know, because you don't want to suffer unduly. That seems reasonable. And you might think, because of that really what you want is happiness. But then Solzhenitsyn, for example, he wrote about what happened in the Gulag Archipelago under Stalin and said, if your goal is happiness, when the jackboots hammer down your and haul you off, you're not going to be happy there. And so, happiness is a boat that is capsized. The waves are always there. And so your philosophy is one of, say, impulsive happiness. Same sort of thing Dostoevsky pointing at, and Kierkegaard. Then you're not prepared when all hell breaks. All hell, it will absolutely 100% break through at some point in your life. And you're lucky if it won't be decades. It'll certainly be some of it, and it might be a lot of it. And for some of you, it's going to be damn near the whole thing. And so if what floats your boat is happiness, you're going to be capsized by the first decent wave. And so then you might ask yourself, what do you have instead of happiness that might be even more reliable? And I do think that adventure is more reliable than happiness. In the Old Testament story of Abraham, founder of the Abrahamic faiths, and obviously you call it a crucial figure in the development of world culture, Abraham is presented as a late bloomer, to say the least. He's like 83. People lived longer back then, at least so the story goes. And he had a very rich father by nomadic standards, and he could just sit around in the tent all day, and a doting mother and a rich father. He could just sit around in the tent all day and eat peeled grapes and busy himself with the continuation of the species. And but God appears to him and says, "Get away, get out of your security, get out of your comfort, leave your family, leave your community, leave your nation, go out into the world." And it's a very interesting story. It's very interesting to contemplate it from both a psychological and a religious perspective, because what God is presented as in that book, which is a crucial book for as I said, for world culture, is God is presented as the manifestation of the Spirit that calls even the too secure and pampered to adventure. And then Abraham has a pretty rough time when he goes out and has his adventure. It's not all, Skittles and roses from then on in. Quite the contrary. And he runs right away into like a conspiracy of elites to steal his wife. He runs into tyranny, runs into starvation. He encounters war. It's like he goes out in the world and he has the whole tragedy of his life, both on the social and political front and individually, But the promise is the promise of adventure, and the implication is that if you have a sufficient adventure, then that cannot so much protect you from suffering, because perhaps that is impossible, but to justify it. And because you kind of know this in your own life. When you look at your life, you might look back on travails that you've undertaken, and they've done end-of-life surveys with people and asked them what they regret. And, people don't regret what they did that didn't work. They regret what they didn't do that could have worked, They regret the chances they didn't take. And, even if you do an evaluation of your biography, one of the things that you want to be able to say to yourself is something like, maybe there's nothing better you can say to yourself than this. You can think about this for yourself and see if it's true. That was extraordinarily difficult, but it was worth it. And, it's not like you can have one of those without the other, because you can't imagine have some confidence in what you've managed to accomplish, right? The kind of confidence would instill you with a certain genuine sense of self-regard despite your fundamental inadequacy. To have that fundamental sense of self-regard that's grounded in something real, it has to be based in a narrative that approximates. That was extremely difficult, but it was worth it. You have to have both of them. And so that's interesting, because one of the questions we always ask is the theodicy question. Technically, the suffering in the world, you see the suffering, or you're suffering, and you wonder, well, how can reality be constant so that I can have faith in its essence when there is so much suffering? And one answer to that is something like, well, how much suffering do you want? And you might think, none. It's like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that's right. At least you want something approximating optimized challenge. So you could say, at least you want to be pushed to your limit. And maybe you find the most exciting times in your life. In fact, you'll pay for this. You'll pay to have this experience, to be pushed to your limit, not beyond it, or maybe even a bit beyond it. And maybe not so far beyond it that you crumble and break and things fall apart. But, could you be pushed to your limit optimally if there wasn't the possibility of falling apart and breaking? That's an open question. How are you ever going to take something seriously? Consequences aren't actually serious. And there's something delightful about dancing on the edge. That's why Hawaiians believed that surfing was sacred. It's because to surf, you have to be on the edge, right? And the waves can come and take you out at any moment. But without the possibility of the waves rising to take you out, then you can't dance on the edge. And maybe that's exactly what you want to do. There's good evidence from the neuroscience literature that consciousness itself is something akin to dancing on the edge. Technically, when you're conscious, you're awake, your brain is occupying a position that's something like chaos and order. If your brain's maximally ordered, nothing is changing. If you're chaotic, then it's anxiety and catastrophe.